Howdy, folks. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and today for you, have a bit of a Dungeons and Dragons video. Going to be talking about some medieval stuff, kind of historical stuff, and also give my way in my opinion on a subject, today's subject, anyway. But really quick, going to plug my Patreon channel. I don't always do this, but from time to time, I do plug my Patreon channel just to remind people that it's there. It does exist. It is a great way to provide the channel additional support. The link is down below in the video description. But hey, if you can't do the Patreon thing, liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing the video are all great ways to also throw me additional support as well. Anyway, let's dive into today's subject, and that is going to be on flails. There seems to be actually a lot of controversy surrounded by flails, and this is kind of a subject that I've actually discussed quite a bit when sitting with friends during SCA events and things of that nature. We would sit down and talk about the flail from time to time, besides many other subjects. And that's because there's a lot of debate on if the flail was really a military weapon or not, especially the type of flail that you see here. Now we do know of the Hussite flail, which is basically it's a long-handled, it's almost a polearm length flail, if you will. We do know about the existence of that, and we do know about it being used in warfare. We also know of flails being used as a farming implement as well. So there's no debate there on that. The real the real kind of controversy, if you will, is on the shorter handled single-handed flails, where you got a short handle, you got a chain, and then you have essentially a morning star ball on the end of a chain. And i think I feel these weapons could have actually existed. They did actually exist. I was sort of want to believe that. Now, the one type of flail I don't buy into is the multi-headed flail. Now, there is some artwork that might indicate multi-headed flails existed, but it actually might have been something else. It's kind of hard to tell what it is, and you're the problem is we're kind of taking this from medieval art. But with that being said, there actually is artisan proof, if you will, of medieval flails. And more often than not, when it comes to the shorter handed flails, you see the art that it's a knight on a horse. But you do see foot infantry with the artisan flails as well. My other problem, too, with the whole statement that, oh, these weapons didn't exist was, well, chained weapons did exist. And Europeans did have encounters with these people. We could look at the Japanese Kasurigama, which actually is a weapon and is fairly effective, especially against unarmored opponents. And of course, you have the sickle part itself, or the scythe part itself, that actually is a pretty dangerous weapon. And then there's also the Chinese meteor hammer, which are essentially two weighted balls on the end of it, on each end of the chain, and it can be quite lethal, especially once again against unarmored opponents. Now, there's quite a few benefits. I could see quite a few benefits within the use of a flail. One of those things being, of course, as you can see here, even though the one knight had blocked the other knight's pull on his flail, he still gets whapped in the back of the head. So there is kind of that as a benefit of the flail, or at least as an obvious benefit of the flail. Also, because of its chain, I would say entangling. You could definitely use the chain to entangle onto someone's weapon. So there's that. I would also say too that it would be a pretty intimidating looking weapon, having a big burly lad wearing plate armor, chasing you down, swinging a flail like a madman. Now, there's also a couple arguments for drawbacks, if you will. One of those I would say is going to be accuracy. It's the with the head of the ball being on a chain, and you're having a short handle. there's kind of some unpredictability involved with the weapon. Now, there's going to be some predictability because as you're swinging outward, the chain is going to straighten out, and then it's going to be like just like swinging a mace or a morning star, anything along those lines. But then once you actually clash against something, it's that's when the unpredictability really comes into play, let alone because of the weight distribution, how it swings around and things of that nature. It's also going to kind of throw off the predicted accuracy, if you will, when you're trying to throw your swing. There's also certain types of attacks that can be done with a mace or a morning star that really can't be done with a flail because of the flail's head once again being on a chain. The next thing I would argue too is the power through. One problem is with having the your striking edge on the chain on like a flail is when you hit something, there's going to be the power of the initial impact, which is going to do damage. Even against someone wearing plate armor, that will do damage. But the problem I see, and this is in my experience and in my knowledge of actually trying to use a flail, is you can't power through. You can't add additional push, add additional force to your blow. So you can't really power it through because essentially once you hit something, that's it. It's over. You got the initial impact, and then it just kind of falls limp or goes wherever it goes. Things of that nature because it's on a chain. So the chain is kind of a flaw in itself with the design of the weapon. The next thing I would argue too is it would be difficult to defend with, and it would be difficult to train with. The big thing is with training with different weapons is they would find there was a lot of different types of ways they would train with weapons. They would use wooden training swords instead of actual swords, or they would use blunted steel swords. When it would come to pole arms, they would use just wooden staves, or they would use a blunted pole arm head on their staff. Um, the so you really can't train. It makes it more difficult to train with, if you will. Now, I guess you could replace the spiked head with like a wooden head, but that still might cause problems in itself. And then when it comes to defending, well, you have a shorter shaft. Your whole shaft, your whole weapon can't be used in a defensive manner like it can with something like a mace or a morning star or even a sword for what it matters. And that's something to kind of think about. That because of the difficulties in training and the difficulties in using it and things of that nature, that maybe you would want to limit within your realm of Dungeons and Dragons. You'd want to limit how many people are really using these, especially when you're designing your NPCs and your knights and so on and so forth. That the flail might not be a heavily favored weapon, and even going by medieval art, it's not a heavily favored weapon. Was not a heavily favored weapon at all. It's actually one of the least featured weapons within medieval art. But with that still being said, though, I have to admit it is a very badass looking weapon, and I can see where it would be really dangerous, especially against lightly armored foes and foes without armor. So there you go. I mean, that's kind of my thoughts about that. But really quick before I go, I do have a little bit of a bonus round for you because actually flails have been used as late as the 20th century, or at least by first world I guess you'd call them first world countries. But they were actually deployed a bit during World War II on tanks. This is actually a Sherman flail tank, which the flail system was used to clear minefields, particularly on the beaches during the D-Day landing. But they would also mount these on other tanks, including the Churchill. And essentially, the idea is as the tank's driving forward, the flail part swings really fast against the ground, essentially beating the ground and detonating the mines. Now, some of these would actually have weighted kind of a weighted ball or a weighted sphere at the end of the chain. Some of them would just be just really heavy chains. They had a couple different variants of these, but I figured it would be really cool to mention that yes, we even have evidence of flails being used as late as the 20th century. Now, of course, they don't get used so much anymore. And actually, many countries has regulations against flails. Surprisingly, if I remember correctly, it's Canada actually has regulations. It's not against smooth-balled flails. I guess in Canada you can't own a spiked ball flail, if I remember correctly. So it's really interesting that there's actually laws and regulations in various countries. Even the United States has laws and regulations against flails. Anyway, folks, I'm going to wrap up today's video at that. Just kind of throwing some stuff out there. Me personally, when it comes to the flail, I like to keep my flails on the big bad evil guys, and every once in a while, if there's some kind of like super special character, I'll have them armed with a flail. But most of the time, personally, within Dungeons and Dragons, I ignore the flail as a weapon. But there you go, folks. Hopefully, you all enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have yourself a wonderful day.